Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I am going to go over what happened this past weekend in the May Melee qualifier regional bracket matches. I know I talked about yesterday in my video that I was going to talk about it again. I want to make it its own video just because of a lot happened, and so I wanted to give it its own video because there's a ton that kind of went down, a ton I want to break down. Before I do that though, I just want to say that today, May 4th, 2021. 1 is Star Wars Day, but 2, more importantly to this channel, it is the 3-year anniversary of the first Overwatch video that I uploaded. So that's pretty cool. So you want to check that out, I'll link it in the description. But this has been a fun 3 years. I've really enjoyed doing Overwatch content and Overwatch League content. Overwatch League didn't really become my full-time focus until much later, but yeah, it's been a good it's been fun, it's been great, and I hope you are all ready for more stuff going forward. But let's jump in, let's start, and let's talk about what happened in this May Melee regional qualifiers. So I'm going to throw the bracket up just so you can see it, just in case you're curious and want to see it, kind of what happened before I kind of jump in and talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it as much game by game. I'm going to talk about it a lot more just kind of broadly, just kind of touching on things that happened. I will kind of be doing it game by game, but it won't be in the same way that it would be in the past, or it'd be kind of like, going down the list in terms of chronological order. But you can see the bracket here. That is what is going on with the bracket. That is what it looks like. And so there's a lot of things to kind of take away from this. And to start, let's jump into the APAC region, because that is kind of where I think a lot of the interesting stuff really happened early on. So we had the Fusion take on the Dragons. Dragons take that one in a 3-2-6 map series. A lot of questions coming out of that one. I think a lot of people really expected the Fusion to make it. I picked the Fusion on Twitter, and I did say I thought the Fusion would win, but I was very confident in Shanghai as well. I actually think that Shanghai, whoever won that matchup, in my opinion, would have been the favorite, except for the Shock. I did think the Shock were kind of the overall favorite still, but I thought that whoever won this Fusion Dragons match would be the favorite realistically, coming out of APAC no matter what, because I think these are two really strong teams. And the way they played against each other kind of showed that. I think a lot of people kind of wrote off the Dragons because they had a bad match against Chengdu, but Chengdu does that to a lot of teams. It's very difficult to do well against Chengdu. I think the second time around, the Shanghai Dragons will be much better the second time they play Chengdu, but it was a good series. To me, the biggest kind of moment that really kind of changed the series was on Volskaya Industries' second attack for the Philadelphia Fusion. They opted to run a double shield composition in overtime. They needed a single tick to win the map, and they opted to go with the double shield. I think it was the wrong move. I think they should have run a dive composition, because that gives Mono and Hotba kind of their strengths. It's a composition that you get a lot of team fights in, or you get more team fights in. It's a quick moving composition. It's really just kind of focused on getting that really key win. Double shield on attack is the slowest composition imaginable, and I don't understand why they decided to run it. I think it was a horrible idea. I think it was the decision that really kind of cost them the series. Obviously, they had chances down the stretch to take it, but that was the thing that opened the door for the Dragons really to be able to just come back soaring down that second half and find the win. I mean, they won on both control maps and the sixth escort map, or the second escort map, but the sixth map, which is an escort map. That's what they won on. If the Fusion won that assault map, we wouldn't be talking about this. We wouldn't be talking about the Dragons moving on. It would have been the Fusion. But the Fusion gave the Dragons the opportunity to come back on that control map and then on that escort map, and that's kind of what cost them the series. So to me, that was a mistake. I thought that Carpe played incredibly. I mean, Carpe has been having an unbelievable season so far. And so I think that really when you look at this series, it comes down to that one key moment. because the Dragons were just basically allowed to stick around in this series by the Fusion. This is an interesting thing, though, I think that a lot of people might talk about, and some people may not, but I think from a fan perspective, if you're a fan of the Fusion, losing this game makes it easier for you to want to see this team reintegrate Funny Astro and Poco and EQO and Shockwave into this roster when they are available. Because if they were able to win the May Melee with this 6-man roster, I think a lot of the fans would have been like, well, do we need Funny Astro back? Now, granted, Philly fans are very loyal to their players, and I love that about Philly fans. There's some things about Philly fans I don't love, but for the most part, Philly fans, I love your dedication to your players, so keep it with that. And so I think that they would still be like, hey, get these players in, we want them back, but if this team had won the May Melee with this roster of 6, I think there'd be a lot of really tough decisions of being like, well, do we bother integrating this? But what you see now is, well, they still have room to improve and room to grow. So now bringing these players back and integrating them into the roster is important to this team moving forward. And I think that is something that will be a big part of whether or not this Fusion roster finds more success down the stretch. I still think they look very good. It's not like they got destroyed by the Dragons. It was a 3-2 series. It was close. Should have been a 3-1 win for them. But hey, you make a mistake, sometimes it comes back to bite you. Very, very, very possible we were talking about this Fusion team being one of the teams playing in the May Melee. It was that close. Dragons, I mean, to me, they just kind of impressed me based on what they were able to do. I still think that they are not as clean as what we saw from them last season. I still think they have flaws. I still think they have pretty clear holes, but I think that they are getting better, and they're integrating DM more in a way that I think will work. And, Fate is not the same flashy player that Fearless is, and we've seen Fearless playing really, really well, and we'll talk about him a little bit later, but I still think this Dragons team is good. I still think they should be one of the favorites overall in this season. I think they should be a team looked at in a really prominent place going forward, so this is a good match, and congrats to the Dragons for making it to the top 4 of May Melee. As we move on to the other APAC game, it was the Seoul Dynasty taking on the Chengdu Hunters. Chengdu Hunters took that one away 3-1. Pretty one-sided series. Amon got some playtime and won a map. Undefeated in the Overwatch League so far this season in terms of maps. Chengdu looks really good. Seoul is probably the weakest of the 4 teams that advanced. I didn't think they were. I actually thought they looked pretty good, but overall, like looking back on it, they're probably the weakest of the 4, so they're the team I think that you should keep your eyes out on when you're looking at kind of where the changes are going forward for June Joust and for the Summer Showdown. Which team may get knocked down and knocked out of those qualifiers, or which of the 4 teams doesn't return for the next tournament. I think Seoul is probably the one to keep your eye out on because they probably are the one that will most likely struggle a little bit more. I think Chengdu looks legit, though. They look really, really good. Their coaching's been really good. Their adaptations have been pretty good. Their compositions have looked good. Gaga being able to play pretty much anything is very, very good for this team. He provided a lot of stability for this team. I think is very good. I've been really impressed with Monk. I don't know how Monk had a week on Fantasy where he was one of the cheapest players available. I don't know how, but I made use of that, let me tell you. And so this Chengdu team will be interesting to watch. And I think they're the team that I'm most intrigued by with this tournament because we saw them beat Shanghai in a dominating fashion. So they might be the best team going into this tournament, but it feels weird to think they're going to win just because of the way they play and the fact that they are a team that just kind of looks very solid in every place, but their play style doesn't give me the most confidence because they're going to have to play a Dallas Fuel team. Spoilers. They're going to have to play a Dallas Fuel team that are very, very good at kind of not doing what's normal. And while Chengdu is also very good at that, it'll be interesting to see what happens. You have 2 teams that can't or that don't play what is meta or what is normal. The Fuel kind of can't, and the Hunters just like to play to their strengths a lot more. Though this season they've definitely become more of a meta team than in the past. So my eyes are on this team, and they're an all Chinese team. This is the most success we've seen an all Chinese roster have in the Overwatch League. So it'll be interesting to see what they're able to do in this tournament. But in NA, it was a different story. And in APAC, two teams that I think a lot of people had a lot of faith in being top level teams advanced. Yes, technically it's the 3 seed and the 4 seed, but the Dragons were one of the preseason favorites, and they were 3-1. The Hunters were doing really, really well recently. They were in third place because of one differential point. It's not that surprising to see them move on, right? I didn't predict any of what happened in North America to happen, except for the Mayhem beating the Defiant, because I wasn't a big believer in the Defiant. I thought the Defiant they were good. They weren't great. They were a team that had shown some promise. They had definitely some things that were strong and some things that they had done well, but ultimately they were not quite there yet. They benefited from having an easy schedule. They played some pretty average teams for the most part, so it made sense that they were going to be able to finish in that kind of 3-1 spot. Well, they didn't play anybody that great, and when they played really good competition like the Justice and the Mayhem, it wasn't very close. That's to be expected, and guess what? It's a way to grow, and it's a way to kind of evolve as a team. That's really good. I did not think the Mayhem would dominate the Justice the way that they did. I'm a very firm believer in the Justice. I think the Justice will continue to get better. They're a team that has not really been here before. There has not been any real sustained success for anybody on this team in the Overwatch League. Now, Decay, of course, last year, very big in this team's playoff run. Closer has been a champion before, and Fury has been a champion before, but it's been a while. Neither of them have been in a championship since 2018. Fury got close last season with the Philadelphia Fusion, but they didn't make it all the way down to the end. They haven't won any championships in a long time, so this is a really, really, really young team and an inexperienced team and that kind of elite level. And Mag has been really good and Assassin's been really good, but they have some time to grow and to evolve. But they will be fine. The Mayhem impressed me a ton. I thought that OG looked so good this series. Slime and Gangnam Jin, I think, right now, is the best support line in the league. It's very close. I think you have a really good support line as well in Izayaki and Lee Jae-gon, but right now, I think that Gangnam Jin Slime is the best support line in the Overwatch League, and they are just elevating this tank line so much, enabling them in a way that we've never seen out of OG, and OG is being allowed to just play his heart out, and he is looking so much better than he looked the last season, than he ever looked on Dallas. This is the OG I think we have all been waiting for. This is the OG we were promised when he kind of came to this Mayhem team, coached under Kuki, and this has been a treat to watch Kuki's little manipulation, his tinkering with OG really pay off, and this Mayhem team was very good, and they 100% earned their spot in Hawaii. I never thought they would make Hawaii. I really do think this is the biggest surprise for me, because I thought Mayhem were good, but I didn't think they were great. I thought they were kind of the outside looking in team when it came to the kind of elite level talent. And you could argue that they had the easier road. They had to play the Defiant, who didn't look very good, and they had to play the Justice, who are somewhat inexperienced. The Mayhem have a lot more experience. This team did a lot more last season that was really good. And you go to the other side, you have the Shock and the Outlaws, who look clean this season and have done more against good opponents. So you could argue the Mayhem had the easier road, and we'll see how they do when they have to play the really good teams that advanced. But I think they looked really good. I think they have looked pretty clean with OG this season, in a way that I think maybe is better than what they did with Fate. The thing with Fate is that Fate is a very solid player, right? He's not going to be a flashy player in the same way that, say, Fearless was for Shanghai, right? Like, the change from Fearless to Fate is pretty noticeable, because Fate is not doing the same kind of flashy big plays all the time like you would get out of Fearless. And it's the same type of change now in the opposite direction for the Mayhem. They went from a very solid kind of a leadership main tank to somebody who's going to make those big plays, who's really kind of getting in there, making space in a way that is very kind of out there, flashy, big moment. And that is really where OG is changing this Mayhem team from last season. And when you give him the support of Slime and Gangnam Jin, this team just looks so good. So I'm really excited to see what this team is able to do in Hawaii up against some of these really good teams in the East. When we go to the other side of the bracket, though, boy, that side was quite the rumble. That was, one where they went real far. And shout out to the Dallas Fuel for not dropping a single map during the matches on Sunday. Now, some of that, I think, is a bit worrisome if you're the Dallas Fuel, because you didn't have to really adapt, right? They destroyed the Shock, and I'm going to talk about the Shock in a little bit. I'll talk about the Shock after I talk about the Fuel. But you sweep the Shock, you sweep the Outlaws. You're not really learning to adapt, and you're not really getting challenged. You're able to kind of pull out some looks that the teams are not super used to seeing. The teams couldn't really scrim for you, so the Outlaws didn't know what to expect, the Shock didn't know what to expect, and the Fuel, who aren't running traditional compositions because they can't, because they don't have a dedicated hit scan player, are able to kind of thrive. But I do want to give a ton of credit, as I said before, I'm going to talk about them. Fearless is absolutely one of, if not the best players this season. He has been absurdly good. He is right now, if I had to pick MVP today, I would pick Fearless. He has been incredible all season, and he was so good in this series. And you know who else was really good in this series? Both of these series, but especially the Houston series. Fielder. This Fuel team is starting to get things together. We didn't see any swapping between Fielder and Rappel. I like Rappel. I think Rappel's a good player. I feel bad for him because he's always been in this kind of spot where he keeps getting switched between. I think Fielder is the better of the two players. I think Fielder has looked so good since he's joined this team. And I do think that Fielder really is a huge piece of this team and their success. And I think that Fearless has been so good, and he's been getting this good amounts of support, just like OG has, and he's just been allowed to feast. And he has been dominating people. I mean, we already talked about last week, he set a record of 16 Primal Rage final blows in a single map, which was the most ever. And he's just being allowed to continue his reign of terror. So honestly, I really do think that this Fuel roster is so strong, and when they do get a hit scan player, I really don't know if this is a team that will struggle, because I think one of the biggest problems a lot of people had, the biggest things people were saying was flexibility, right? Will they be good in every meta? And I think a lot of people thought no. And we haven't seen them in every meta. We haven't seen them have to play in a double shield meta, which I think is where they will struggle the most, because Fearless's Orisa is not the best. And I think we might see this team struggle in very hit scan heavy metas if they come up in the future, until they get their new hit scan player. So those are things that you definitely have to be concerned about and worried about, and things you have to continue to look at when you look at this Fuel team. But for right now, they are able to play what they want, really. Sparkle has impressed me on Tracer more than I thought he would. And I think that they've been able to really find compositions that work for them. And that's a huge credit to Rush and his coaching for really making this team work in a way that I don't think a lot of people expect them to work this quickly. Before I talk about the Shock, real quickly, I just want to say about the Outlaws. I thought they just looked lost. I mean, I think it's hard to prep for the Fuel, like I said, and that's something you have to kind of understand is the Fuel are a tough team to prep for when they don't run what's kind of normal and what's meta, and so it's so easy to get lost playing a team like the Fuel when you just don't know what to expect and you don't know what you're even going into, and it's just such a unique style that just it's very difficult to beat when you don't have a lot to go off of. And I think that is something that will be interesting to track going into the qualifier, or into the actual melee, because Chengdu will have been able to watch tape on the Fuel. They'll be able to see some stuff and be able to say, hey, this isn't working, this isn't working. They'll be able to kind of get a better sense of what the Fuel like to do, and they'll be able to work on it more than the Outlaws are able to. And so to me, I don't take much away from the Outlaws. I just think the Outlaws are a team that I think had done really well this early on, but I think a lot of why they did well was them playing above where they were. I think they looked really good, and they've kind of shown themselves to be a good team. I think they are still a strong team, but I definitely think that they kind of ended up getting it a bit too high up, and I think that they're kind of, they're on a bit of a drop down. I think this is good for them to be able to kind of bounce back from and learn from and adapt from to kind of improve. So I don't have a ton of bad things to say with the Outlaws, because to me, I didn't see the Outlaws losing this match in the same way that I think the Shock did. The Outlaws played pretty well. The Fuel just outplayed them, and it's just, places you have to improve and just work on cleaning up to be a better team. The Shock, on the other hand, never thought I would see the day that I think the Shock made very, very, very bad and severe coaching errors that have hurt this team. And they've been doing this for a while now. This Violet DPS thing needs to stop, right? It just needs to stop. It doesn't make any sense, right? If he can't play the Ana, then either sub him out when you want to put Twilight in, or put the time into focusing on making sure that Violet has a really strong Ana. If you want him in for every single map, then the way to do that is not putting him in on DPS, it's making sure his Ana is up to par where you need it to be. Because it's not going to work when you have Glister sitting on the bench and you're putting Violet in at DPS. It's just not the same thing, and it was so heavily exploited. When you're constantly switching your roster, you're doing Super on one map, and then Smurf, and then back to Super, and then you have Twilight in the backline for one map, and Violet in the backline for two, and you have Nero and Striker for one, and then Nero Striker for two, and Violet and Striker. It's too many changes, and it's too much out-coaching yourself. And I think that this is a team that needs to stop that. You need to just commit. FD God is on Twitter a lot, kind of talking about how he's playing poorly. He kind of blames himself for it. And I think that FD God is struggling. He's not having the best season right now, but I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that there's so much that's just changing with the roster. He's not able to fully kind of mesh with the same players. And so things are changing every single map. And when you have this many new pieces you have to integrate into a roster, and you just keep changing them the way you are, you're going to run into problems like this. And I think that the best thing to do is just find a six-man roster that works. And I think the ideal roster for them, I think, is having Nero and Striker in, and then subbing Nero out for Glister when need be, and then Tayo as kind of a specialist in certain roles, probably, if I had to guess. And then having, of course, Violet and FD God in the backline, and then your tanks, of course, Choyobin, and ideally, I think Smurf is who they would like to have in, but Super in those Reinhardt compositions, either one, is just kind of where they are. And I think that they need to get this down, and they need to just stop making these substitutions. Subbing out one DPS for another DPS is fine. Constantly subbing your main tank and your supports isn't going to help you, and I think they need to clean this up because it is hurting them more than it's helping them. And watching this team, they just did not look nearly prepared enough and ready enough to find any success whatsoever. So I really need to see the Shock make some changes to the way they're approaching this season, the way they're approaching this roster, because it's been boy, it's wow. That's something. But yeah, those are my thoughts on what happened. I'll give my picks for this tomorrow. We'll go through the bracket and I'll kind of give my explanations for things. So look out for that tomorrow. Let me know your thoughts on what happened on Sunday in the comments down below. But that's all from me for today. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. And thanks for 3 years, everybody. And that's all from me for today. So I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.